Hi guys, Ricky Pope here, and this week on the Christian Nerds Unite podcast, we interview Ryan Felton, the host of City on a Hill Gaming, a family-friendly D&D real play podcast, plus scripture and nerdy news, and we'll get to all of that right after this. Ryan Felton has become a friend of the show over the past 6 months or so, and I am excited to finally have him on the show this week to talk about tabletop role-playing games and real play podcasts. Let's start with some scripture. Isaiah 9, 2, 6, and 7. The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be upon his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the greatness of his government and peace there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on and forever. The zeal of the Lord Almighty will accomplish this. Now, I wanted to read this scripture. It's kind of a Christmas scripture. It is a foreshadowing of Christ's coming. And this week is the first week of Advent. If that's a new term for you, then I encourage you to look it up and or listen to my podcast from last year about this same time, my Advent episode. Advent consists of 4 weeks prior to Christmas and is a time of expectant waiting associated with the birth of Christ, and can also be a time where we look forward to the Lord's return. I pray that this Advent season you'll focus on who Jesus is and his coming kingdom, as I do. Well, not a lot of nerdy news this week, but there were a couple of things of note recently that we have not yet discussed. So, showrunner and producer Jack Schaefer is returning to the Marvel Universe with a new Disney Plus show called Vision Quest, or at least that's the expectation of it being called Vision Quest. The show is said to follow the new white version of Vision, following the events of WandaVision. Paul Bettany will be returning to play the Vision. Based on reports, this is currently in the writing stage, so much could change between now and production time. Ryan Reynolds is currently in pre-production on the third Deadpool film, but in a recent interview, Reynolds said he and the writers of Deadpool 1 and 2 wrote a full Deadpool Christmas movie that hasn't been made yet. It was lost in the movement from Fox to Disney. He said that he would love to see a song and dance number in a Deadpool movie. There's still no information on how or if the upcoming Deadpool 3 will fit into the MCU. We will have to wait and see. Hopefully we will get a lot more information about that just after the first of the year. I found Ryan Felton and the City on a Hill Gaming Real Play podcast about 18 months ago while I was looking for a Christian or family-friendly Dungeons & Dragons real play podcast. I was investigating tabletop role-playing games at the time, and I wanted to hear some people really playing the game. This episode, we take time to discuss how he got into tabletop role-playing games and why City on a Hill came to be as it is. We talked so long, I decided to split this up into 2 episodes. Now, let's get right into our interview with Ryan Felton. Ryan Felton, it is so good to have you on the Christian Nerds Unite podcast today.
Hello, sir. Thank you for having me. And I am excited.
You are excited. That's fantastic.
Yes.
So I came across you when I was kind of reinvestigating tabletop role-playing games, probably about a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago.
Okay.
And I started looking for some Christian resources about tabletop role playing games, I came across City on a Hill, and I came across Saving the Game, and you guys intertwine quite a bit.
Yes.
Uh, I had actually been looking for a real play podcast with some Christian ideas.
Okay.
And that's when City on a Hill came into my purview. And I started listening to the podcast, and I have really, really enjoyed the things that you guys have done over the several years. I went back and listened to your stuff from the beginning, actually, because I wanted to.
We're 4.5 years deep now.
Yeah, I went back and listened to some of your older stuff because I was super interested in it.
Love it.
I had done some tabletop role playing games, way back when I was in high school, some in college, and then got married and kind of left it all behind and was kind of picking it back up. And that's where I ran into your stuff.
Okay,
but I've wanted to have you on the show for some time, and I'm so excited to finally have you here.
I appreciate you inviting me, and it's good to know. I don't normally know where people find us necessarily. In conjunction with Saving the Game makes a lot of sense. We at some point kidnapped them, and they just belong to us now.
Yes,
because they
Peter and Grant are still
show.
on the show,
yes.
still on your show, but
yeah,
they don't have
Saving
the Game going forward anymore.
Correct. Their backlog is still online. They have left that hosted and up, but they just kind of all, because at that point it was Peter, Grant, and Jenny, because they had a different co-host earlier on. I think a young man named
Brandon. Yeah.
But Peter, Grant, and Jenny had just kind of all hit a point, I think, during COVID where life just got to be a bit too much. And so they kind of ended Saving the Game. Ultimately, Jenny stopped, recording with us for City on a Hill. I'm hoping to get her back for at least something here soon. The profession of librarian is not fun during a pandemic, and that took a real toll on her schedule. So we lost Jenny for a while. But yeah, we kind of absorbed them inadvertently. I reached out to them because I needed more players after season 1. And I was like, would any of the 3 of you be interested? And the response I got from Peter was, would all 3 of us be okay? And I'm like, silently like freaking out a little bit, because it's like, that's going to put me at 6 players. That's a terrifying concept. Sure, yeah, why not? That sounds great. And it's been awesome, and I love all 3 of them. They're great people, and they've been great for what we do. But it was that was an interesting moment where I'm like, yes. Yes, sure. Bring it on. Because it's one of those moments where I felt like God's like, it's just go, you're fine. I'm like, okay, here we go. Bring it on. Let's do it.
Well, tell our audience who might not be familiar, tell us a little bit about what City on a Hill Gaming is and how it all came about.
So I was doing the same thing you were doing, quite literally. This was, I guess it started at the end of 2017. I had a change in my life where I had kind of gotten a little bit, not even a little bit, a lot back closer to God, because I had kind of wandered off of my own accord. Nothing was wrong. I just wasn't interested. And I had come back, and I had felt really convicted about my language. I was cursing like a sailor all the time, and there was just it was just like a vocabulary thing for me. And it just wasn't working. And I felt there's an evangelist I listen to, or used to listen to from time to time. Her name is Joyce Meyer. And she made a point about it once that was like, language is not just about you and your relationship with God. It's about how other people see God through you when they know you're a Christian. And I'm like, well, crap. Okay. Yep. No, you're right. Okay. Got to make a change. And so I absorb things like a really, really efficient, terrible sponge. And so I had to cut a lot of content out that had a lot of language, because when it comes in from me watching it, it tends to come right back out. And so that meant I lost all of the actual plays I was listening to at that point in my life, because I had stopped playing regularly. I had moved, and that caused me to stop playing. And I had been listening to actual plays, found some I loved, some folks that were just literally hit record on the microphone in the middle of a table. Everybody sits around and eats. You literally hear when the food gets delivered on the recording. Like, this is this old school.
Yeah.
that long ago in the podcast days.
Pizza's here.
Pizza's here. Okay. And there's literally a pause and then the recording picks back up, but they don't cut anything out. But it felt real and I appreciated that because that's how my game group went.
Yes.
Oh, hold on. The pizza's here or the whatever. Yeah. So it felt very real to me, but I had to let those go. And I did the same thing you did. It was New Year's Eve. I'm sitting at work. It's like just after midnight. So I guess it's New Year's Day at that point, 2018. And I'm looking for family-friendly actual plays, but I was very particular about also looking for one that was faith-based. And I found the same thing you found. I found Saving the Game, but they weren't playing.
Right.
They did not have the bandwidth to do that on top of everything else. And I didn't find anyone that was. And I felt like God was just nudging me. It's like, so do it. And I'm like, okay. And I reached out to some friends and I was very specific. I was like, I didn't even necessarily want people that knew a lot about tabletop games or basically had any experience playing. I wanted people that would do family friendly on purpose with me.
Oh yeah.
And that's where we started, and it's just kind of gone from there. And the cast has changed. We literally have no one at this point who was there for session 1.
Oh wow, really?
Daniel joined us, I think, 2 or 3 sessions into the first season. He just schedule-wise wasn't there the first couple of times. And he's the longest running person there with us. Ben joined at the end of season 1, and he's still there. But William left at the end of season 3. He was the first, the longest running one up until that point. But yeah, we're 2 sessions into season 4. So 4 episodes, I think, have aired, or 3, and I still need to upload something next week. One or the other. I'm not sure which. I actually need to check my listings for that. Because I had to do a temporary thing to fill in last week. We're getting ready to record some more. I now have 7 players because I can't stop myself. And we went back to, there's a little more spread out, a little more diversity. We have women in the group again because we had women in season 1 and 2, and then didn't for season 3. We do again for season 4. Andrea, who is a webcomic artist by hobby and I won't say profession. She's an artist by profession, but she's a webcomic artist. And then Shanine, who is most well known for Hoot and Howl.
Okay,
blog, and does a bunch of podcasting. They both joined us. My friend Greg, who I met through Saving the Game, joined us. And yeah, we're back to 7 players and just as much, if not more, nonsense. Sort of, I refer to us as not so much an actual play podcast, but more of a nonsense factory. Because that just seems to be what we do. We just do nonsense and people enjoy it. So whatever, that's fine. But that seems to be our sort of, we're very intentional. I'm not, because I'm not good at it, but the majority of people who have on our show are very intentional about making puns.
And yes, I was going to say your show is very punny.
Gosh, man. Yes, exactly. No, it's awful, and I personally don't even like it a lot of the time. But I appreciate the consistency and the talent, and it is funny. And a lot of the times it's my fault because I'll say something.
You set them up.
Not on purpose.
It is definitely like, oh, you just threw that softball right up there for them to knock out of the park.
That was my whole mistake. I think 3/4 of season 1, the main enemy was a group of merfolk. Or maybe that was season 2. I can't remember which. But basically, whichever season that was, it was season 1. The rest of that season was just fish jokes.
Yes, lots of fish puns. I remember listening.
Ones you would never think of. And I'm just like, I'm disappointed and proud of you, which is an impressive combination. Good. I remember I used to work with special ed kids, and we had one young lady who managed to take one of my coworkers, and this was an elementary school age child. She takes one of my coworkers who is in college and manages to somehow like hip toss him and pin him on the ground.
Oh, wow.
And I'm simultaneously, and I'm like, and she just looks at me like she's waiting for me to count the pin like it's a WWE pay-per-view. And I'm like, what? I'm both really proud of you and immensely disappointed and concerned. And I don't know which one I should reflect to you as the adult in this situation. But there you go. That's what happens a lot with us on City. It's
this is just so you know, that's a lot like parenthood.
Okay, good.
Your children do something ridiculous, and you desperately try not to enjoy and laugh about it because
That's
you
encouraging.
need to tell them never ever do this again.
That's not acceptable.
As
Stop it.
hysterical as it is. Yes,
Perfect.
that
Good. Well,
is
at least
what
I'm getting
parenthood is
experience
like.
now. That's
Yes,
good.
so
I love to see it. No, and
you're ahead of the game.
that's just sort of what we do. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't seem to matter who I have, even if I have special guests. We get the exact same level of nonsense. So, and by the way, you are welcome to join us in the future. We do a lot of it basically never happens in the main game, but we do a lot of special content
Mm.
on the side in a variety
I
of systems.
I would
And
love to join in sometime.
I feel like you would fit in really well in a Roll for Shoes game, which is something I'm going to have to introduce you to, but I think you'll enjoy it. It's a special breed of nonsense that feels very us.
Okay.
Um,
I'm not familiar with Roll for Shoes.
oh, it's a monster of a game that has a grand total of 6 rules.
Hey, I like
But it's great.
Rules light is kind of an interesting idea.
It is.
I
It
have
is the
become
definition of
fascinated with.
rules light. It is very much the within reason, of course. Very much
Yes.
the sort of the stage comedy yes and idea of tabletop
Okay.
RPGs.
Nice.
There's really not a lot of opportunity for me to say no as long as you're successful. We just have to figure out where the nonsense makes something that resembles sense and keep moving.
Yes.
That's that Roll for Shoes is phenomenal like that. And it's the kind of thing where you don't even have to really have a starting point. You can literally make it up as you go. I have a list of like 15 Roll for Shoes scenario ideas, each of which at the longest are 3 lines long. And I could probably
Nice.
run them with no other prep, technically speaking.
Nice.
Because it's that open and fluid a system. And it's meant to be. It's meant to be off the cuff and a little more random. Fill in the blank when you don't have. I think it was best described to me as either what you do. It's what you do when you need to fill time because you're not going to do the normal thing.
Okay.
It's like what Blank Scenario is entirely about, because I know you've had them on before. Their whole shtick is coming up with something to do for a new DM to do on the fly, or to do when you don't have half your party or something.
Yes.
Roll for Shoes is that as a system.
Okay. Interesting.
Very, very much to me. So it's a good time.
I will have to look further into that. I'm intrigued. Now your podcast, very specifically, I say very specifically, for the most part, your podcast is Dungeons and Dragons centric.
Yes.
And for the most part, you've done 5e.
Correct.
For most of your seasons until this latest season.
Yeah, we got weird. No, we started
talk
as
to me
5e,
a little bit about that.
And we've done, like you said, we've done some other things. We've done Roll for Shoes and Numenera and Star Wars and stuff like that as side games. What changed this year is Peter, who you've had on the show before, Peter Martin, formerly of Saving the Game, as far as I'm concerned, still of Saving the Game, in his free time does professional game design. Right. So he actually publishes his own work as third-party content. But he got the opportunity to work with a game design studio in England called Ian Publishing, as they were working on a project. The easiest way I can relate this is if people are familiar with Pathfinder as a tabletop RPG. Pathfinder was something that came out as sort of a third-party company's reimagining of 3.5 D&D. So what Ian Publishing has made, and what Peter worked with him on, is something called Level Up Advanced 5th Edition, which is what Pathfinder is to 3.5. It is to 5th Edition D&D. It's sort of this group's reimagining based on what is open source, open license, kind of reimagining, reworking of things. And we were talking about, maybe doing something with it when it was going to be coming out of Kickstarter and whatever. And ultimately it just became kind of a discussion of, do we just want to move to this? Because we had already kind of moved a little bit away from core 5th edition to kind of the concept that, normally in D&D, a lot of your stat spread is determined by what race you are. So like if you're a dwarf, you always have more points in Constitution or whatever. Right. We had moved away from that to where whatever you had, a plus here and a minus here, and you could do whatever with them. Normally within reason. And that's one of the things that Level Up had done as well. And one
And
of
you
the things,
guys were already homebrewing some
yes,
things
our whole
in
game world
previously.
is homebrewed, and we just kind of we've homebrewed classes, we've
Yeah.
homebrewed some other stuff. Um, and that class was for a specific reason, for a comfort thing for me. Um, but it just kind of became a, okay, well, do we just want to move to this system completely? So our main game is now, Level Up Advanced 5e. And that's partially because, thanks to Peter and to that company, we have access to the PDFs for all the players. That's just something that was given to us,
Nice.
which was super, super great of them. And so it's just been kind of, okay, well, this is what we're going to do. And they love the idea because it's a new game. So
Hmm.
having someone they can point to and they can say is playing it, that's
Yeah.
outside of their core group of people, they were, fine with the idea. So that's kind of the path we're on now, is using Level Up, and we're just kind of starting to explore it. And the next session we play, I'm actually putting Level Up on hold and replacing it largely with something I made up on my own that is a variation of rock, paper, scissors, lizard, Spock,
I
themed around
heard
professional wrestling.
I heard this. I was listening to the episode, this most recent episode, and I heard you say that,
Yes.
and I
Yeah.
was like, okay,
I literally
because there
I had
is
an
actually a wrestling role playing game,
I think
and
there's
at
more than
first
one,
I
actually.
thought,
Yes.
"Are you going to go there?" And then you
No.
said rock paper scissors, and I was like,
So what
"That's
happened was
interesting.
I
That's
had
an
an idea
interesting
for
idea."
like a bit, like a real short bit, and
Hmm.
it turned into a whole thing. So I have taken so there's rock paper scissors.
Hmm.
There's rock paper scissors lizard Spock, and
Yes,
then
which
there's larger versions past that, that you can find charts for online. I took a rock paper scissors lizard Spock chart and recreated it from the ground up based on various categories of professional wrestling moves.
okay.
Presented it to a group of professional wrestling fans I know, and was like, "Does this at all make sense?" And then that's what the party's gonna take control of NPCs, and the party is currently on a ship, a
Hmm.
naval vessel, and every voyage the crew has a professional wrestling night on the ship, and the party is going to be in charge, is going to be controlling the crew in their wrestling matches. This was all just because I had this idea of like doing a professional wrestling announcing thing in the middle of one of the sessions, and I'm like, no, we can do this, and then this turns into a whole lot of nonsense, which is how my mind works. But yeah, so we're just
So,
abandoning everything we know for something I made up in an hour.
so if the episode goes really well, you need to publish a rules light version of this
Right.
somewhere.
Yes. And if it goes awfully, I still need to at least post all the documentation online so people can try my nonsense. Whichever happens is fine.
That sounds great.
I think no matter what happens, it should be funny. And if I learn real quickly it's not, I can pivot partway through and it'll be fine. So
Gotcha.
I
You
named a bunch of the crew of the ship is actually based off of different professional wrestlers. And I'm curious to see if people recognize who is who, and then I'll
Hmm.
explain at some point who is who. But I spend the majority of the time actually figuring those out, which I'm not proud of. But I feel like I put good effort into there. There's some deep cuts there for folks, and I'm excited about it.
Well, now your show, your sessions, uh, for the most part, are kind of the creation of your mind. Um,
Yes.
you are doing, and this is a question I ask a lot of people when we talk about tabletop role playing games. Um, there are people who really, like my DM, just loves to use scenario books that are pre-written.
Yeah.
It makes things easier for him. Um,
Absolutely.
he had there are some particular reasons that he really loves doing that. And then there are people who just hate using any kind of scenario book that might hold them in check.
Right. Yes.
And your show is all original. Um, what is that process like when you're trying to come up with, okay, this is the story arc that I want to happen, but good and well your players are going to screw something up along the way.
So remind me what your GM's name is, because I was listening to that episode with him. What is his name?
Mark.
Mark. Okay, so something that Mark said when you two were talking was that no good, I'm paraphrasing, I believe it was no good battle plan survives an encounter with the enemy.
Yes, exactly.
So I've learned to accept that. That's just the process. No, for me, this is entirely yes, and I have no objection to pre-written scenarios. There's a word I want to use for them, but I don't remember what it is. Um, some of them are excellent. I've played through a
Mhm.
great many of them. Some of them are very short, some of them are very long, and they do a great job telling stories. My objection was that I wanted the content to. My definition of family friendly and faith based tends to narrow down the things I have in our game world. Like our game world is
Mm,
technically monotheistic.
right.
And so for a lot of that, and to avoid like we just literally just don't I don't use demons or devils as enemies in our
Hmm.
games. Just to avoid all of that, I've tended to avoid pre-written content
Hmm.
and just do my own thing. And I can kind of lead them down whatever path I want to attempt to, and they'll get somewhere interesting. I've learned they won't get there the way I plan for them to, but typically what they do instead, I think ultimately is more entertaining than whatever I had come up with. I know that's been the experience largely. So yeah, no, that was a necessity for me from a content standpoint.
Okay.
Not that I mind module is the word I wanted. So like I mean, you can find a module that you can run in 3 hours for third
Hmm.
level characters, and there's nothing wrong with that. If that's how you want to play, that's great. It doesn't fit the methodology of what I'm trying to
Hmm.
of the way I want to handle content
Mm.
from a certain perspective. So I've just avoided them. We've
Okay.
used them a time or two in some of our extra content. Like I think a couple of the things, I know at least one of the two of the times we've run Feng Shui 2. My friend Justin has
Yes.
run Feng Shui for us. I think it technically one of those was pre-written. I know one wasn't. I think one of them was. I want to say the Star Wars thing we played with Mike from Geek at Arms was pre-written, but I'm
Mm.
not even positive about that. So it kind of comes and goes. I don't object to someone running something like that with us, as
Hmm.
long as it fits within the box of what I'm comfortable with.
Gotcha.
Um, we get plenty of of dimensional control in our game solely by the fact that we only record for 2 hours at a time.
Mm.
And so me kind of just having a little more fluidity in what I do kind of I think works better in that structure.
Mm.
Um, I would love for us to play for 4 or 5 hours at a time, but everyone in our games is a full grown adult. Great many of them have spouses and or children.
Hmm.
And it's just not our functionality currently. So I've tended to avoid those more structured things in favor of literally having less constraints and more freedom to
Hmm.
handle things how I prefer to.
Totally get it.
Taking my
So,
hands off, taking my hands off the game for season 3 and just me not even being the one running the game was enough of a thing to concern me that I don't need any more of that. And Grant did a great job. I have no objection to what Grant did, and I trusted him to do it. But that was the first time, I think, or the first time for more than literally a one-off that anyone else had run my game.
mm,
And so that was enough of a culture shock for me that I don't need to dig through what somebody else has written and try and figure out what I'm comfortable with and what I'm not. It just won't go well.
I
I'm better
I
with it
can
the other way.
I can understand that. A couple months ago, when I was in the hospital sick, I turned over my podcast to some friends. I don't know if you're familiar with the Reverend and the Reprobate out of
I've heard the
Texas.
name. Yes.
Okay. So I turned my show over to them
Okay.
to let them do some interesting things. And they brought some guests on, and it was wild and crazy. And my niece, her children listened to my show. And her daughter said, "Why is he even friends with them?"
Love it. You love to see it. Okay. Well
Children are
then.
very honest.
Yes, they are. You
I
love to
knew
see it from them.
I knew the show was going to be bizarre and completely different than
Right.
anything that I would have ever created for my show. But I was okay with that.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
but so I know that feeling of, I'm going to release the reins. Am I really comfortable with this?
I
So
was
I appreciate that idea.
I
So
was fortunate enough to do that with Mike Perna. He had to take kind of his hands off the Barton Bible for a while. and I got to do my own episode of Bard and Bible, and I'm sure, and I think he's done this twice now. So there's probably, I think, 8 episodes of Bard and Bible that he has zero control over the content of, and I'm sure that was immensely stressful, especially for a podcast that is meant to be devotional in its intent. To just like take your hands off entirely for like 45 minutes at a time, I'm sure was not a good time from some perspective.
Yep. So talk to me a little bit about how you got involved with tabletop role-playing games. What did that look like for you? What was your first experience?
So I was introduced by a friend in college. He said, come hang out with us. We're going to play Dungeons and Dragons. And I'm like, oh, I don't know about that one. I was wrong. Fair enough. So we sat down and we were going to play 3.5 D&D. Okay. We were there for about 2.5 hours. I think he had a total of 10 or 11 players.
Wow.
Because he just kept having people who wanted to come, and people just kind of kept coming and going from the room, and we basically never got anywhere. But that kind of started me down a path. I played off and on with them. I was in a regular, I think I spent about 2.5 years in a 50 out of 52 weeks of the year, regular 4 to 6 hours every Thursday night game.
Wow.
For 2.5 years. And it was great. I loved it. That group was not the best influence on me from a spiritual sense. So it's probably best that I don't play with them anymore. But I learned a lot. And that was actually the thing I was originally taught to play, because I didn't really get much out of that 3.5 game. I was actually originally taught to play 4th edition. Okay. So I have a somewhat less disparaging view of 4th edition than a lot of people do. The combat is still sluggish as all get out. The simplest fight still takes you an hour, and that's awful. But I don't see it as harshly as some people do, because it's like the Star Wars prequels. They were the first Star Wars I got to see in theaters, so I don't see them in the same light as a lot of Star Wars fans do. And I'm like, no, that's my Star Wars. I got to go see that in theaters, therefore it is still good Star Wars. And that's always been an interesting point for me. But that's how it was sort of with 4th edition. But that's where I started, and then just kind of stopped playing. That was around the release of D&D Next, which is what became 5th edition. Ultimately, okay. I think Next was the playtest of 5e.
Okay.
And then when we got into doing City, 5th edition was what was popular. So me having played, I think literally 2.5 hours of 5e when we started, 10 hours of 5. It was some unnecessarily low number. We just dove in, and I think you said Mark, said one of the things he would recommend players do is know the rules of the game they're playing. I did not. I did not, for the majority of City, know the 5th edition rules all particularly well. So don't do as I say, not as I did, kids. Wasn't good. But yeah, that's what was
books
popular.
Are for.
That's right, man. That's what asking friends on Discord calls is for. Is that how that works? No. Ah, crap. Oh, well. That's how it works now. For that session, at least.
Whatever the GM says, that's right. That's exactly
what I say is final. We've done that more than once.
Yes.
Not always a positive thing. But yeah, that was what people were doing. So that's what I jumped in on. And we played probably 5 or 6 different systems at this point across the whole show. But yeah, we're technically a D&D or D&D rework podcast. I stopped calling us a Dungeons and Dragons actual play podcast at some point, and just went with tabletop RPG podcast, because we do a variety of things. But yeah, that's where I got in, and that's sort of where we got in for Steady, was 5e was what everyone was talking about. I actually prefer Pathfinder. But it's less well known, more complicated, and not as popular from a listening medium. So I will say Pathfinder, for all I enjoy about it, it has some flaws, and it's one of those things like 3.5 and 3rd edition that are a little rules heavy, very, very, very heavy. My melee character that should be melee and magic damage should not have an armor class north of 35, regardless of what level we are. But with feats, anything is possible in Pathfinder. So I stand by the fact with feats, very little is possible in 5th edition. But I have a friend who will argue that point with me regularly. But yeah, that's just kind of, that's where I got started, and I just kind of was in and out of it. But I realized I missed it and wanted to listen to it, and that's kind of ultimately where we ended up where we did.
Very cool. It was great getting to spend time chatting with Ryan. Make sure you check back next week for part 2, where we talk more about Ryan's preferred game system and game mechanics and some of the more interesting aspects of the City on a Hill podcast gameplay. Well, that's all I have for you today. Don't forget to like, subscribe, click, just click all those buttons down below so that you can keep up with us whenever we put out new content. And you can find all of our social links and links to our YouTube channel and to our online store at ChristianNerdsUnite.com. If you enjoy the show and want to help even more, consider becoming a supporter on Patreon. We've changed all of our Patreon levels, and every level has great benefits and makes a huge difference in the ministry we're able to do. Supporters will get to hear exclusive stories of believers that we're serving around the world through our ministry partners. To check it out or to partner with us, go to patreon.com/ChristianNerdsUnite or ChristianNerdsUnite.com and click on support in the menu. Before you go, I do want to leave you with this blessing from Psalm 20. May the Lord answer you when you are in distress. May the name of the God of Jacob protect you. May he send you help from the sanctuary and grant and support from Zion. We'll see you next week. Blessings.